In the second session, new challenges and threats were discussed: China and Russia. The title of the session was New Threats and Challenges, Russia and China. Dominique David is the editor-in-chief of the Politique étrangère Foreign Affairs, one of the managers at Ramses and the French Institute of International Affairs. David pointed out that the USA is still a superpower in the economic sphere, military and cultural, but they are no longer the only dominant power in the world. The race for power is currently underway. China wants to make consolidating their economy. They implement an important Belt and Road initiative. However, the Chinese find it difficult to challenge the Americans directly in the Pacific, therefore they chose a different strategy from Russia. And if China wants to focus on its economic strength, Russia sees it differently. Russians realize that they are no longer a global power, but want to continue to be seated at the table bargain. The Russians have many sources of energy and good relations with Beijing, or the possibility of projecting power close to its borders, but also in the Middle East and Africa. David stressed that Russia's alliance with China is only a tactical alliance directed against the West. It should also be remembered that if not, we talk to Russians. We push them into the arms of the Chinese. In the case of Europe, diplomatic unity in the international arena is important. Nevertheless, Europe no longer counts in global competition. Rolf Nichol is the former German ambassador to Poland in 2014 to 2020. As noted, Russia is trying to legitimize in their former spheres of influence. However, it is a serious challenge for multilateralism, democracy, respect for human rights, including the current world order. In turn, China remains a serious technological competitor or strategic rival in the Indo-Pacific and African region. However, China and Russia are also partners. Ambassador Nichol recalled that in 2009, it was China who pulled the world out of the financial crisis, and Russia can be partner in non-proliferation efforts in the world. Like its predecessor, it indicates that only a tactical alliance Russian-Chinese is possible against Western democratic forces, and a strong strategic alliance is unlikely to be possible between these countries. Besides, the position Russia is weakening, dependent on resource prices, and China's position is growing. In the case of Europe, it should focus on implementing the strategic initiative known as Global Gateway. Europe itself, however, is witnessing a new geopolitical crisis within it, as example of Russian-Ukrainian tensions and the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border. Bogdan Klich is a senator and former Polish defense minister. At the beginning, the minister pointed to such a comparison from the Polish perspective, that Russia is seen more as a threat and Beijing as a challenge. The process of annexation of Belarus has recently begun, but the last 8 years have shown that Russia is ready to use its forces also abroad, for example in Syria, Libya, or the Sahel countries. Besides, Russia also wants to establish a dominant position in the Arctic. As for Ukraine, Putin believes that there is no sovereign Ukraine without partnership with Russia. Ukraine is a necessary element of space reintegration in post-Soviet area, and thus without subordinating Ukraine to this process will not be achieved. To this end, Russia will probably continue to deepen the divisions in the West, and the Polish-Belarusian border is a peculiar test of solidarity in the framework NATO countries. In the context of China, Europe remains deeply divided. Even in Poland there is a discussion on this issue between the opposition and the government. Additionally, there is some difference between the European position and American regarding China. Professor Andrei Pratz is the director of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. Referring to the previous interlocutors, he reminds that Russia is first and foremost a neighbor in commercial, cultural and linguistic terms, and China remains both a challenge and a partner. China will soon be the largest world economy, and this cannot be ignored. In turn, Russia has been for 70 years remained a threat to Latvian identity. After the Cold War, when it seemed that the post-Soviet period was ended with nirvana and everything was agreed upon, there appeared a rivalry between USA and China. It should also be recalled that Poland, Romania and the Baltic states are seen as the most transatlantic countries in the region. From the European perspective, a significant convergence is worth noting in the sphere of values. Nevertheless, there were also discrepancies within countries. To send or not to send delegations to the Winter Olympics in China. The third session was titled US-EU Relations Effects of Joe Biden Administration's New Opening Towards the European Union in the Area of Security. Dr. Hans-Gert Pöttering is the former president of the European Parliament in 2007 to 2009 and the former president of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. He sat in the European Parliament for 35 years. He mentioned common values and interests that help Europe unite and thus defend oneself. Even in relation to the US, Europe should support its nearest allies. In this context, recalled the delivery of submarines to Australia. After France made the Century contract with Australia, it turned out that the contract was terminated, and Australia chose partners from the USA and Great Britain. Dr. Hans-Gert Pöttering also recalled that the Americans did not consult with Europe for its withdrawal from Afghanistan, both during Trump presidency February 2020 agreement and Biden August 2021, at a time when Americans have an orientation towards the Pacific. This is even more important to further strengthen the European pillar. It should be noted that at the beginning of the EU it had no competence in the field of security and defense even back in the 1980s, and this is changing now. Eric Bratberg is the director of the Europe program and a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington. Former director for special projects and senior fellow at the McCain Institute for International Leadership. He confirmed the fact that during the Trump presidency, the approach of this administration was Eurosceptic. We have a certain continuity in the Biden administration when it comes to the perception of European defense. The current administration wants to strengthen NATO and transatlantic security. In this context, it is necessary to overcome disagreements about the European Defense Fund. In the field of European security, it is of great importance also Article 44 of the Treaty on European Union. Americans see little importance of Europe in the area of Pacific versus China's deterrence. Nevertheless, Europe can remain a partner for local countries in the region that cooperate with the USA. In the Pacific region, there is a Sino-American rivalry. That is a zero-sum game. Dr. Werner Fassalabend is the president of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, AIES, former Minister of Defense of Austria in 1990 to 2000. Dr. Fassalabend similarly confirmed that it is now the main maritime center, which is the Indo-Pacific region. President Biden performed his duties for the first 3 months professionally. He had a policy of continuing security. A shadow for this administration, there was an evacuation from Afghanistan, not communicated with Europe. Nevertheless, the Europeans were unable to carry out evacuation without American aid. In this context, the future should ensure a certain degree of strategic autonomy in Europe. NATO as a symbol of the community of the West is the only organization capable of dealing with greater threats, such as the Russian invasion. In this tandem, however, the US remains a global power, and Europe does not. Europe doesn't even have influence in Afghanistan, and Turkey does. It should be remembered that many important technological changes are initiated in the military sector. Within the EU, a certain French-German dualism can be recognized, where France is a post-colonial country and Germany with mainly pacifist discourse. In NATO, we must take greater responsibility for defense from European side. In the EU, the only exceptions in this regard are the French and the other Baltic states and Poland. As for strategic European issues, Dr. Fassalabend also pointed the significant importance of the line between the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean that remains a peculiar line of life for Europe. Ridoswa Sikorsky is a member of the European Parliament, a former defense minister and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Poland. Minister Sikorsky agreed with his predecessors that the EU was not taking seriously security matters. An example of this can be the adopted 7-year budget for defense or establishment of the European Defense Fund for the years 2021 to 2027. 7.9 billion euros of this fund for the entire continent means only 1 billion euros a year, which is not serious. At the same time, the Treaty of Lisbon concerning common policy has been violated in the sphere of defense. He was also skeptical about the Nord Stream 2 project as a factor lowering the issue of security for Central and Eastern Europe. Robert Chachelle is a member of the editorial board of the Polish Institute of International Affairs Polish Diplomatic Review, and director of the NATO Information Office in Moscow during 2010 to 2015. In his opinion, America would not like to wage 2 wars simultaneously, one in Europe and the other in the Pacific. For this reason, the current challenges are without precedent or unpredictable. As COVID, a potential invasion of Ukraine would have a great security impact on Europe, as well as if the U.S. had not received support from its partners in the Pacific. On the issue of European autonomy, it is difficult to deal with this question in the field of defense because it is currently not possible to replace the American possibilities. In Britain, the land forces remain smallest since Napoleonic times. Thus, a common European security policy is fundamental.